I dreamed that my childhood sweetheart and his beloved, his so-called white moonlight, ended up together, only for him to later cheat on her, be torn apart by internet scandals, and spiral into a life of misery. So I pretended to be sick, tugged at his sleeve, and begged him to take me to the hospital, deliberately stopping him from going to the train station to confess to her and run away together. Because of that, Jacob was successfully recommended to Stanford and landed a high-paying job at a top tech company, making hundreds of thousands a year. His white moonlight, Emily, became one of the biggest rising stars in showbiz and had just publicly announced her relationship with an award-winning actor. They both had bright futures ahead of them. But one day, Jacob suddenly asked to meet with me and personally pushed me off the 18th floor. If you hadn't deliberately stopped me, he said, I would have been the one she just announced as her best actor boyfriend. As I fell, I grabbed Jacob's collar and dragged him down with me. We smashed into the ground together, bodies torn apart. Then I woke up, back at the moment when I was pretending to be sick, still clinging to his sleeve, begging him not to leave. I hadn't even let go yet. But then I saw the joy on Jacob's face. He realized I had been reborn. He shook me off and ran. He had been reborn too. Perfect. At the train station, I saw him locked in a passionate kiss with Emily, their arms wrapped tightly around each other, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The two of them kissed while glancing over at me, like something out of a pure love scene in a coming-of-age novel. I rushed out of the hospital and saw the whole thing. I couldn't help but curl my lips into a smile. That's right. I was reborn. The pain of being shattered after falling from the 18th floor still lingered in my body. I couldn't tell if the heat on my forehead was from blood or just a fever. Lily, Jacob had once said, if you hadn't faked being sick and stopped me from confessing to Emily, we would have been together already. You ruined my love. You meddled where you shouldn't have. His face, distorted in rage, was still burned into my mind. He had both hands around my throat, pinning half of my body over the edge of the rooftop. Death hovered all around me. All I had wanted was to keep Jacob from destroying his future for Emily. I never imagined he would hate me that much. If Jacob had run away with Emily back then, how would he have been recommended to Stanford? He really thought he could go be a trainee with her? Sure, Jacob had a handsome face, but he couldn't carry a tune to save his life. His body movements were stiff and awkward, and even his theater acting was painfully unnatural. What made him think he had what it took? I had underestimated how deep Jacob's feelings for Emily truly were. In the end, he pushed me off that rooftop. But this time, I wouldn't interfere in Jacob's life again. Whether he lives or dies, succeeds or fails, it has nothing to do with me anymore. If he wants to chase love, let him. The bond we shared growing up was paid back in full the moment he killed me on that rooftop. Jacob saw me too. His eyes were filled with venom, as if warning me. Was it just my imagination? Or had he really been reborn as well? In the previous life, he stayed by my side in the hospital for a long time. But this time, when I woke up, all I saw was his back as he ran off without looking back. My guess was soon confirmed. Emily didn't leave this time. She obediently returned to school. I had no idea how Jacob convinced her, but from then on, the two of them flaunted their love publicly on campus every day. One rare moment when Jacob showed up alone, he stopped me on my way to the cafeteria. Lily, he said coldly, I'm not going to let you ruin things between me and Emmy this time. Stay out of our business and keep your dirty little thoughts to yourself. I didn't even care about his cruel words. What mattered was that he said this time. That confirmed it. Jacob had been reborn too. When I dragged him down to die with me, we both came back. Perfect. This time, I'd let Jacob see for himself whether his choice was right or mine. But I had no intention of letting him know I was reborn too. Just saying one more word to him felt dirty. I ignored the hatred in his eyes and walked past him without even giving him a glance. In my previous life, I sacrificed everything to help him, pulling all-nighters to tutor him, reviewing with him, studying at the library together. He finally got accepted. But me? I came down with a fever on the day of the college entrance exam, from staying up too many nights, making notes and highlighting key points for him. I barely scraped by with a passing score. I had wasted too much time on Jacob and ruined myself in the process. Now that I think back on it, I must have been out of my mind to ever believe him when he said, "Someday, we'll go to the same college, Lily. I'll work hard. Let's work hard together, okay?" Back then, Jacob's eyes looked so sincere, filled with light. Just because of that one sentence, I became this overbearing, controlling mom figure, hovering over his life. I had no life of my own, no personal time, no social circle. Even Jacob's friends used to tease me by calling me his stepmom. I was so foolish. For the sake of one promise, I gave up so much. Everything changed when Emily Green appeared. She was an art student, an incredible dancer. I heard she had been training since she was a child. During the school talent show, her solo performance on stage completely stole Jacob's heart. From that moment on, all Jacob could talk about was Emily. His words, his eyes, she was everywhere. "Lily, can you bring an extra breakfast tomorrow? Lily, what kind of guys do you think a goddess like Emily would like?" At that point, Jacob had clearly tossed our years of history aside. Of course, nothing beats the thrill of something new. Freshness is always the most powerful drug. Emily really was beautiful. I'll give her that. But I wasn't lacking either. Jacob had no idea how many suitors I had turned down for him, and yet, not once did he ever look at me. Well then, I'd love to see how far Jacob gets this time without my tutoring and discipline. As for me, I'm gonna make up for the regret I had in my college entrance exam. Thanks to my experience from the previous life, I now had a sharp sense for investments and stocks. I convinced my parents to put money into the market. Fortunately, they adored me and always took my words seriously. I was deeply moved. Just thinking about how, in the last life, they had to bury their own daughter, the heartbreak was so intense, I could barely breathe. I couldn't believe I had broken their hearts over some man. My parents never had high expectations for me. All they ever wanted was for me to be healthy and happy. I'm the kind of person who refuses to fall behind. I handled all the practical arrangements, then put down my phone and buried myself in the library, grinding through practice exams non-stop. After all, it had been quite a few years since I last took the SATs, and I had forgotten a lot. But I had a strong foundation, and it didn't take long for me to get back on track. "You must be Lily, right? I hear Jacob mention you all the time." A pleasant voice drifted down from above. I looked up and found myself face to face with Emily's soft, watery eyes. She stood right in front of me, smiling sweetly. And she was alone. God knows how they managed to act like they were wearing a matching outfit, but still split up to come at me separately. I lowered my head again and kept doing practice problems. A challenge that obvious? I wasn't interested. I'll admit I did once have feelings for Jacob. There's nothing shameful about that. But now, he means nothing to me. So this kind of ridiculous magnetic field showdown that Emily wanted to pull me into? I had no intention of playing along. I thought if I ignored her, she'd just leave on her own. But to my surprise, she pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "You know, you're really pretty. I just don't get why Jacob doesn't like you. Honestly, he's such a piece of work," Emily said, propping her chin on her hand, giving me this mocking tone wrapped in fake sympathy. I almost laughed. I'd lived 2 lifetimes. How could I not recognize such blatant provocation? Her unspoken message was clear. I'd been by Jacob's side all those years, and still I couldn't compare to a latecomer like her. She wanted me to get mad. "Sorry, sweetheart, I don't have time to play house with little kids. Red beans pair with longing, green beans, well, they go with toads." I lifted my gaze, gave Emily a light smile, then lowered my head again and kept studying without expression, a moment of silence for her. God knows what her face looked like just then, probably fuming, because her tone definitely carried a trace of anger. "So what if you knew his weak spots? In the end, he's still a tree stump." Then she scoffed. "I was scouted by a talent agent, you know. I'm about to become a star. My appearance fee already beats your future annual salary." Yes, in the last life, Emily really did become a red-hot actress. But so what? All women have an expiration date in the entertainment industry. In domestic showbiz, after turning 30, roles dry up fast. Not that I had any obligation to warn her. Arrogant people with inflated egos never get far. Yeah, you're right about everything," I said. "So how about you get lost now?" What a jinx. She was ruining my focus. Emily's face twisted with frustration. She yanked her chair back with a loud screech, drawing irritated stares from all around. Under the weight of everyone's judgment, she finally left, humiliated. I shook my head with a cold smile. There are champions in every field, 360 professions, all with their own excellence. I respect all kinds of careers. But someone like Emily, she doesn't deserve my respect. I had more important things to worry about. I was preparing for the elite mock exam. Soon, the first results came out. I stood by the ranking board, checking the list. Just as I expected, I was in first place. Under everyone's gaze, I turned to leave. In the past, whenever rankings came out, I'd always look for Jacob's name first. But this time I couldn't even be bothered to search for it. Lily's amazing, first place again. Wait, weren't Jacob and Lily always fighting for first and second? How'd Jacob fall behind into the triple digits? Well, duh, he's too busy dating now. True. When you've got a goddess, who cares about studying anymore? Their whispers didn't bother me. I just smirked. Though I was mildly surprised. Jacob still managed to rank somewhere in the middle. I guess he hadn't completely forgotten everything from before. But what did that have to do with me? Getting rid of that burden felt like a breath of fresh air. As I pushed through the crowd, deep in thought, I suddenly bumped straight into Jacob. Hard. I winced and clutched my forehead. Jacob had gotten into fitness, but that had happened later in our past life. He used to be constantly sick, and the doctor told him he needed more exercise. So, I had paid for gym memberships for both of us, dragging him to work out every day. Seems like some habits are hard to break. Does it feel boring now that no one's competing for first place with you? Jacob said, smiling smugly. He lowered his gaze, staring directly at me. Back then, whenever Jacob looked at me like that, my heart would skip a beat. He was tall, and to him, I was just his little potato. I'll admit, when I used to see the sharp line of his jaw, I'd sometimes get a bit love-struck. Honestly, my social circle was tiny. Aside from Jacob, there was no one else. And Jacob really was easy on the eyes. But now, he just looked average to me. I curved my lips into a smile. I had never realized this before, but Jacob had never really been my goal. He was always far beneath me. Without me, he was nothing. Just as I was about to walk away, Jacob grabbed my wrist. His face held a hint of disbelief. Lily, you were reborn too, weren't you? Sure, in the past, if Jacob had scored that low, I definitely would have pulled him aside for a serious talk and gone home to report it to his parents. But now, my cold indifference was completely out of sync with the Lily he once knew. So what if Jacob found out? I yanked my hand away and looked at him coolly. And if I was? Honestly, I couldn't care less how Jacob reacted. He chuckled. Good. If you don't want to end up getting me killed again like last time, you'd better not get any ideas. I'd heard this kind of threat twice now. My ears were practically calloused from it. I scratched the side of my head, visibly annoyed. Don't flatter yourself, I said, then turned and walked away without a second glance. Why didn't I realize before how ridiculous Jacob could be? Or maybe it was because I cared so much that he took it for granted. Used it as permission to do whatever he wanted. Pathetic. That weekend, when I went home, I could hear Jacob's mother shouting at him from across the hall. Our families lived in apartments directly across from each other. My mom and Jacob's mom were best friends. Back when Jacob was born, his mom had been devastated that he wasn't a girl. She actually begged my mom to trade kids with her. Of course, my mom refused. Eventually, Jacob's mom treated me like her own daughter. She doted on me, spoiled me. Jacob used to get mad about that all the time. To repay her kindness, I used to treat Jacob well too. Looking back on our childhood, the truth is, Jacob was actually really kind to me. He used to chase away the older kids who bullied me, and he'd always share his snacks with me. There were so many little moments like that. But later on, our roles completely reversed. In the end, it doesn't matter. Jacob and I are even now. Sweetheart, can you take out the trash? My mom called out from the kitchen, poking her head around the corner. Snapped out of my memories, I grabbed the trash and opened the front door. At almost the exact same moment, Jacob opened his door too. He froze for a second, and I immediately noticed the slap mark on his face. If this had been before, any time Jacob got scolded or hit, I would have pulled him into our house and played the peacemaker, smoothing things over with his mom until she calmed down. Then he'd go back home, and because of me, his mom would hold off on punishing him further. That had become our unspoken routine over the years. But not anymore. I ignored the desperate look in Jacob's eyes and walked straight downstairs with the trash in hand. What I hadn't expected was how thick-skinned Jacob could be. He chased after me, grabbed my arm, and angrily demanded, "Aren't you supposed to go talk to my mom and calm her down? Where am I supposed to sleep tonight?" I nearly rolled my eyes out of my head. What kind of twisted emotional blackmail was that? Where you sleep is none of my damn business. I yanked my arm out of his grip. His touch made my skin crawl now. Jacob's expression darkened. He was really mad. What I hated most was how well I knew him, his tone, his mannerisms, even his micro-expressions. I could read him like a book. But the sad part? Jacob had never taken the time to understand me. "Jacob?" Emily's voice rang out from a distance, full of frustration. She came running up to us. At that moment, Jacob and I were standing face to face, locked in a tense standoff. To outsiders, it might have looked a little intimate. No wonder Emily was upset. But whether she was mad or not didn't matter to me in the slightest. Not wanting to get dragged into more pointless drama, I turned to leave. Of course, Emily wasn't about to let that happen. She rushed forward and linked her arm through Jacob's possessively, stepping right into my path. "Lily, why can't you just change your ways? Why are you still clinging to Jacob?" she snapped. Seriously? I wanted to know which of her eyes saw me clinging to him. Talking to people this delusional was a direct attack on my brain cells. And as if to add insult to injury, Jacob stepped 2 paces away from me, as if I was something filthy he needed to avoid. "Wow. You promised me you'd stop talking to her, Jacob. Seriously, well done." Emily sneered. "Nice job keeping that promise." "Great. Now the blame was all on Jacob, not my problem anymore. So, can I leave now?" "Emmy, it wasn't me, it was her. She kept approaching me," Jacob protested. I smiled slightly, opened my voice recorder app, and played back the audio I had just recorded, smooth and seamless. I just happened to know Jacob too well. I knew exactly how he'd twist the truth. His face visibly turned pale. "Lily, how can you be so despicable? Don't you have any morals?" he shouted, lunging at me to grab my phone. I dodged him easily, stepping aside with grace. "Why should I care about morals when neither of you have any?" I said with a smirk. I gave them both a perfect little smile, PR level, and walked away like I owned the place. From the window upstairs, I saw Emily pounding on Jacob's chest in frustration before storming off, leaving him standing there like a scolded dog. Not long after, he trudged back upstairs, shoulders slumped. My phone lit up. It was a WeChat message from Jacob. "So you're happy now that you saw us fighting?" 2 lifetimes, and you still can't let me go," I laughed. Why on earth would I hold on to a murderer? Jacob's childish tantrum was a complete waste of my time. Without hesitation, I blocked him, deleted the chat, and unfriended him in one swift move. 3 strikes. Done. Now I could finally sleep in peace. Looked like Emily and Jacob were giving each other the cold shoulder for a few days. I don't know how Jacob managed to talk his way through it, but somehow, the 2 of them got back together again. All of this gossip came from the girls around me. I didn't want to hear any of it, but Jacob and Emily were such a loud and high-profile couple on campus that it was impossible to avoid. It was like Jacob was making up for all the regrets from his past life, going out of his way to please Emily, just like he used to do with me. I used to be the one Jacob called a clingy, desperate girl. That part of my life was over now. I snapped out of my thoughts and turned back to memorizing key points, flipping pages, and repeating the material. "Come on, let's go see the drama." Jacob and Emily got their parents called in. Apparently, it's because of their early relationship. Someone suddenly burst into the classroom with this news, and in the blink of an eye, everyone rushed out to watch. The room emptied almost instantly. Which was fine. Quiet suited me better. I stayed in my seat, continuing to work on practice problems. I had never been into gossip, and I certainly didn't have time for it now. Every day counted. I was determined to get into Tsinghua. I was going to study abroad and fulfill the dream I had once given up. In my previous life, I'd given up that precious chance because Jacob said he couldn't handle being alone, that he was busy with work and couldn't take care of his mom, and begged me to stay and help. Jacob this, Jacob that, everything in my past life had revolved around Jacob. Now that I think about it, I had lived like a shadow of myself. I had no dreams of my own, no life of my own. Everything I did was for him and for his family, again and again. What a joke. If Jacob had ever seen and appreciated my efforts, instead of thinking everything I did was just my duty, maybe I wouldn't have looked like such a fool. Lily, could you bring this to the homeroom teacher's office? It's the class fund. I've got a stomachache, said a voice from the doorway. I looked up and paused when I saw who it was, Silver White. So the future Oscar-winning actor had been sitting in my classroom all along. Silver was my classmate. Back then, I'd been so focused on orbiting around Jacob that I didn't even remember most of my classmates' names. It was ridiculous. Aside from my academic ranking, my presence in the class was basically non-existent. I wasn't even invited to the class reunion later on. No wonder Silver had looked so familiar when I saw that celebrity announcement about Emily and her boyfriend. Now that I saw him in real life, he had thick, square glasses and a buzz cut. I could barely make out the handsome bone structure and sharp lips beneath it all. Had he gotten plastic surgery later? I was a little curious. At the moment, it was hard to match this Silver, plain, nearsighted, and quiet, with the future national heartthrob worth billions. But what if he got a full makeover? That thought suddenly intrigued me. I took the envelope from him and nodded. "You're not going to see the drama?" he asked. "I mean, you and Jacob used to be close." The question caught me off guard. In the entertainment world, Silver would later be known for his cold and distant image. Yet here he was, gossiping like a teenager. Then again, he was a teenager right now, and actors do need to shape their public personas. Maybe that's how he ended up entangled with Emily. I smiled. "Used to be," I said simply. "You sure you don't need to go to the nurse?" Sweat beaded on Silver's forehead, and his face looked a bit pale, but he shook his head. "I'll be fine if I sit down for a bit." With that, he headed to his seat at the very back of the room. No wonder I hadn't seen him earlier. I shrugged and went to deliver the envelope to the teacher. In the office, Jacob and Emily were sitting side by side. Their mothers were there too, both nodding obediently as the teacher lectured them. The teacher's main point was clear. Senior year should be all about academics. I glanced at Jacob's mom and was surprised at how much she had aged. Then again, having a son like Jacob would drain anyone dry. "Here's the class fund," I said casually as I entered, placing the envelope on the teacher's desk. The teacher nodded at me, and I turned to leave. But Jacob's mom reached out and grabbed my arm. "Lily, could you help Jacob? His grades have dropped a lot lately," she pleaded. Then she glanced at the pair sitting nearby, her eyes full of complicated emotion and helplessness. To be fair, Jacob's mom had always treated me kindly, almost like a daughter. And she was an elder after all. I couldn't just be cold to her. Still, I felt conflicted as I replied, "Auntie, you know, I'm under a lot of pressure myself." Besides, Jacob had already warned me more than once not to meddle in his life. I was just stating facts. If he really wanted to pressure me to say something, even his mom wouldn't push too hard. So when Jacob's mom hesitated to let go of my arm, watching me walk away with reluctant, pleading eyes, my heart tightened a little. But I had no choice. I wasn't in the wrong. I filled a paper cup with hot water from the dispenser and returned to the classroom. The room was empty except for Silver, slumped alone over his desk. "Drink some hot water. It'll help a bit," I said softly, knocking gently on his desk. Silver looked up. He wasn't wearing glasses now, and those ink-black eyes of his locked onto me, misted with moisture. A breeze outside lifted the curtain beside us, and for a moment I froze in place. So Silver hadn't gotten plastic surgery after all. This was his real face. I couldn't take my eyes off him. "Thanks," he said, taking the cup from me. The steam rose up against his cheeks, and droplets of moisture clung to his lashes. I wondered what Emily would think if she saw Silver like this. With the college entrance exams approaching fast, Jacob must have believed he could rely on the knowledge from his past life to score well. But I couldn't help wondering, how would a little psychological interference affect his performance? "You should wear contact lenses from now on," I said suddenly. Silver turned to me, confused. "Why?" "Because your eyes are beautiful." I remembered reading in some entertainment news article that in our past life, Silver had lost his glasses right before the exam. He was severely nearsighted and ended up flunking the test, landing at a third-tier college. Later, he had eye surgery, was scouted by an agent, and dropped out before finishing school to enter the entertainment industry. After a long pause, Silver responded in a quiet voice, "Okay." The final countdown to the exam had everyone in a frenzy. The library was packed to the brim every day, like we were all preparing for battle. I was always in a rush to grab a seat. But maybe it was just my imagination. Whenever I arrived, there was always an open seat next to Silver. He always claimed he was saving it for a friend, but the friend had last-minute plans and couldn't make it, so I could sit there instead. I believed him the first couple of times. But when it kept happening, again and again, it became clear that Silver was doing it on purpose. I'd lived 2 lives. I wasn't exactly clueless about emotional cues. Silver was a good-looking guy with talent, objectively appealing. His only blemish was that past fling with Emily. But that was from the last life. Still, my only priority now was my future. Though, if Silver happened to be useful, I wouldn't waste the opportunity. His feelings might just make my plans easier. "What school are you aiming for?" I asked seriously, sitting beside him. Silver's pen paused mid-stroke. He turned slightly to look at me. Since that day, he had taken my advice and started wearing contact lenses. I had to admit, his eyes really were stunning, like they could speak. "You?" he asked, unexpectedly tossing the question back at me. I gave an honest answer. "Tsinghua." Silver nodded and replied earnestly, "Me too." Then he lowered his head and went back to solving problems. For some reason, my heart skipped a beat. I couldn't help but laugh at myself. I had the mental age of someone in their 30s now. How could I still get flustered by a teenage boy? I felt a little uneasy. I couldn't even focus properly on my practice problems. "Don't worry," Silver said, almost like he was speaking to himself. "We'll both get what we want." I didn't respond. I just stared at his side profile, momentarily lost in thought. Jacob and Emily, on the other hand, hadn't toned things down at all after their parents were called in. The teachers had started focusing their energy on the high-performing students, leaving Jacob to fend for himself. His grades had fallen to the bottom of the class. The homeroom teacher had tried to pull him back up at first, but now it seemed like she'd given up on him entirely. I kept hearing stories about Jacob and Emily, skipping class, drag racing, bungee jumping, drinking, acting like wild free spirits. Maybe in their eyes it was romantic, maybe it felt like freedom. To me, it was just plain stupid. Later, there was a stretch where I didn't see Silver at all. The exam was only a week away. Then one day, I found Jacob waiting outside the dorm building. I thought he was waiting for Emily, but the moment Jacob saw me, he rushed over like a madman. His face was scruffy with stubble, hair disheveled, reeking of alcohol. He grabbed the collar of my shirt and shook me violently. "Was it you again?" he shouted. "Lily, why can't you just let us be? Because of you, Emmy won't even see me anymore." I was completely baffled. I kneed him hard in the groin. He doubled over in pain. "Jacob, whatever happens between you two, whether it's running away together or dying for love, I don't care. If you can't find Emily, go die on your own. Leave me out of it." I had no idea if my words had any real effect, but after that day, Jacob never came looking for me again. The college entrance exams ended. I felt completely at ease. I knew I had it in the bag. When I got home, I heard from Jacob's mom that he never even took the exam. Instead, he'd gone after Emily. She had signed with a talent agency and left town to become a trainee. Jacob hopped on an overnight bus to follow her to another city and missed the test entirely. The cruel twist? Emily told him she had a boyfriend and told him to get lost. Jacob's mom cried so hard she almost passed out. It was my mom who kept comforting her the whole time. I guess that dream I had in my last life was real, at least half of it. And yet, I hadn't even played my trump card, Silver, and Jacob had already collapsed like a house of cards. When my admission letter from Tsinghua came, I wasn't surprised. I had earned it. My parents, on the other hand, were over the moon. They threw a massive graduation banquet in celebration. At first, they didn't plan to invite Jacob's mom, not wanting to upset her. But neighbors talk, and eventually, she showed up anyway. I remember her sitting quietly in the corner, her expression dim. My parents were busy drinking and laughing with guests. In all the adult socializing, I, the guest of honor, faded into the background. But I didn't mind. I enjoyed the peace. I quietly took a seat beside Jacob's mom and gently held her hand. "Auntie, I'm sorry," I said. I didn't even know why I felt guilty. Maybe it was because I hadn't done what she hoped pulled Jacob back from the edge. Or maybe it was the flashy celebration my family threw that had hurt her. But she just patted my hand, her face finally softening with a bit of comfort. "You've made something of yourself," she said. "That makes me happy." She didn't mention Jacob. Not once. All her pain was buried in that one long sigh. Jacob never showed up in our lives again. Meanwhile, Emily's name was becoming well known in the industry. I wasn't surprised. Her path was still more or less the same as in my last life. At freshman orientation, I saw Silver. He waved at me with a bright smile. That day, the sun was shining. It lit up Silver's whole figure like he was glowing. I thought, maybe in this life, Silver wouldn't end up in showbiz after all. He walked over and took my suitcase. "Long time no see," he said. I nodded, repeating the same greeting. Somehow, that simple exchange made the distance between us feel much smaller. The awkwardness from earlier was gone. As regular college life unfolded, Jacob became nothing more than a memory. My life had finally moved on for good. The last thing I ever expected was to hear anything about Jacob again, and when I did, it was online. Emily's fame had skyrocketed. At some point, the two of them had apparently gotten back together. That mysterious boyfriend of hers had vanished without a trace. Online, people were tearing Jacob apart. Everywhere, it was the same kind of hate. No degree, no skills, not even a stable job. Living entirely off Emily's money. People called him a freeloader, said he was trash, raised without morals, totally unworthy of her. And some comments were even worse. I couldn't imagine how Jacob must have felt reading them. So my dream had come true again. The scandal just kept snowballing, and eventually the top trending search was, "When will Jacob and Emily break up?" I stared blankly at my phone, scrolling through it slowly. Is this what Jacob wanted? Was this the life he traded everything for? Meanwhile, the investments and stocks I'd gotten my parents to back had turned a huge profit. We moved into a luxury villa, finally saying goodbye to that apartment across from Jacob's family once and for all. When I saw Jacob again, he was standing outside the gate of our university. I had just come back from hot pot with my roommates, when he suddenly rushed toward me and grabbed my shoulders. After years without contact, Jacob looked completely run down, unkempt facial hair, messy hair, reeking of alcohol. Who would have thought that he was once the dazzling heartthrob of our school? Oh right, that heartthrob title was something everyone gave him back then. But to be fair, that was only because Silver still wore glasses in those days. Otherwise, Jacob never would have stood a chance. My roommates looked worried, but I waved them off, motioning for them to leave. Just in case Jacob lost his mind like he did in my past life and tried to kill me again, I sent them a text. "If I don't come back in 30 minutes, call the police. Lily, lend me some money. I want to buy a stock." "I swear I'll make a comeback," Jacob said, acting like I owed him something. Just like always. I was beyond tired of this. Besides, even in our past life, when Jacob lost Emily, he still had a decent job. He had never borrowed money from anyone. He used to be so proud. But now, even with the memories of a past life and knowledge of what investments would yield quick returns, he was so broke that he didn't even have seed money. That was a new low. Maybe Jacob never realized that from the beginning. He and Emily were never the same kind of people. It's a shame. Back then, I poured my heart out trying to talk sense into him. I gave everything I had, only to be blamed for getting in the way of true love, and resented for an entire lifetime. I coldly pushed him away. But Jacob lost control. Like a madman, he clung to me, refusing to let go. "Don't lie. I know your family made a ton off those investments. I only need 200,000. How hard is that for you?" Honestly, 200,000 wasn't a big deal to me anymore. It wasn't even worth mentioning, but give it to him? "No, absolutely not. Sorry, I don't have it," I said flatly. Maybe it was my coldness that finally pierced him. Jacob collapsed onto the ground, sitting in the dirt, clutching his head in despair. "You've changed, Lily," he muttered. I nearly laughed. "I told you, don't ever show up in front of me again. Thank you." I turned to leave, not even wanting to waste another breath. But Jacob dropped to his knees. He grabbed my sleeve and pleaded, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. I should have listened to you. Now I have no degree, no job, not even Emily wants me. You were right from the start. In the past, I might have softened at that, but now, not even a flicker of emotion stirred in me. You can't reason with someone who's hell-bent on ruining themselves. He chose to go all in on Emily, and the result was set from the beginning. Take your tragic little story and get lost, I said coldly, yanking my sleeve from his grip. Call the cops if you want. Kneel all you like. It's not me who should be embarrassed. I never turned back to see what happened to Jacob after that. I had bigger things to prepare for, like going abroad. Silver and I both submitted our applications. Over the years, we'd maintained this steady closeness, never too far, never too close. Maybe he knew, deep down, that in my heart the future would always matter more than love. And the best thing he could do was quietly walk beside me. After graduating overseas, I started a company. Silver bought in as a shareholder. I didn't need the money. But Silver's family was middle class at best, and they'd taken out loans to fund his studies abroad. I wanted to repay him for all the care and companionship he'd given me over the years. The money he used to buy into the company? He earned it little by little, working part-time jobs. I knew how hard it had been for him, but I never said anything about it. Over New Year's, Silver and I returned to China together. Our old classmates wanted to organize a reunion. In my past life, I had never gone to a class reunion, but this time I didn't want to miss it. So many years had passed. Everyone had changed. Some had built successful careers, some were married with kids. A lot of them flattered me, throwing around polite, empty words. Jacob was there too. He didn't speak the entire time, just sat quietly beside whoever he was next to, clinking glasses and drinking in silence. That was when I realized just how dull class reunions actually were. Maybe it was just part of growing up. In the adult world, it's nearly impossible to hold on to the innocence of school day friendships. But then again, wasn't I the same way now? After a few rounds of drinks, the conversation at the table started to drag. Everyone was talking over one another. It felt stuffy, so I used an excuse to step outside for some air. Silver followed me. We stood side by side at the edge of the terrace, letting the breeze brush past us. Have you ever thought about getting married? Silver asked, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I turned my head in disbelief, looking at him. Maybe it was the alcohol. His cheeks were tinged with red, the color deepening against his fair skin. I didn't know how to respond. I knew Silver had waited for me for many years. But right then, I couldn't give him an answer. What I felt for Silver was more habit than romance. Maybe, once, there had been a flicker of emotion. But the moment I decided to use him, I had killed that feeling. I'm not a good person, especially not when standing next to someone as pure, body and soul, as Silver. I didn't deserve him. Before I could speak, Emily appeared out of nowhere and suddenly threw her arms around Silver right in front of me. She was crying hard. Why did you leave without a word? You didn't even say goodbye, she sobbed. Hearing those words made my entire body freeze. My blood ran cold. Silver had been in a relationship with Emily? Was he the mysterious boyfriend she once mentioned? I glanced up and saw Jacob not far away, watching from the distance. His eyes were locked on Emily. He wasn't too far. He must have heard everything. Silver said nothing. Emily kept crying. After you left, I got back together with Jacob. I tried to distract myself, but I couldn't. I realized I couldn't stop thinking about you. I love you. I really love you. Please don't leave me again. Even now, Emily was a top celebrity, and yet here she was, throwing herself at a man in public without any fear of ending up on the front page tomorrow. Compared to how silent she had been when Jacob was being attacked online, her boldness now made one thing clear. Emily truly, desperately loved Silver. But Silver calmly pushed her away, his face expressionless, his voice icy. I was only using you. That's all. Now that I've gotten what I wanted, I'm done. Then he grabbed my hand and raised it in front of Emily. This is my girlfriend. Please stop bothering me. Emily's eyes widened in rage the moment she saw it was me. Her gaze ignited with fury, and she raised her hand to slap me. But Silver caught her wrist before she could touch me. His voice, cold and terrifying, cut through the night. If you lay a hand on her, I won't hesitate to drag you down with me. As expected, Emily's arm fell limply to her side. She collapsed onto the ground, trembling. Silver pulled me away. As we passed Jacob, he suddenly leaned in close and whispered into my ear, "Lily, I lost you." I froze for just a second, then kept walking. "Jacob," I thought silently, "I was never yours to begin with." After the reunion ended, Silver instinctively walked me home. We had both been drinking, so I suggested walking instead of getting a ride. It wasn't far, and more importantly, there was something I'd been curious about. Silver nodded in agreement. We walked side by side, slowly. "So," I asked, "when you said we'd both get what we wanted, was it because you already knew my plan? Are you reborn too?" I thought back to my past life. Silver and I had never interacted then. But the first time he spoke to me in this life, he'd acted like we were already familiar. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. But looking back now, it was filled with red flags. Silver's long silence said everything I needed to know. Over the years I had come to understand him deeply. His silence always meant yes. My hand trembled uncontrollably, because Silver had known I hated Emily, knew I loathed Jacob, knew I wanted to use him. And he had played along with it all, without me ever saying a word. He had done all of it for me. Which meant, in our previous life, he had been with Emily? Suddenly, I didn't dare think any further. From what I knew about Silver, he had never liked Emily's type. I knew just how quiet and restrained he really was. It was hard to imagine that in our previous life, Silver had actually chosen to enter the entertainment industry and live in the spotlight. Was it all because of Emily? But one thing I was certain of, Silver was smart and capable. Whatever he set his mind to, he not only achieved it, but did it exceptionally well. Under his leadership, the company we built together had grown into one of the Fortune Global 500. Yet, in our previous life, Silver and I had never even crossed paths. I looked at him, my gaze filled with complicated emotion. "I've been reborn twice," I said softly. "This is my second time." He nodded. "In the first life, you didn't enter the entertainment industry. You lived like a normal student. Later, you married me." I stared at him wide-eyed, my pupils constricted. "But you got stomach cancer," he continued. "I couldn't accept it, so I killed myself." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Why Silver was always so strict about my diet, always making sure I ate on time, never let me touch greasy or spicy food. It wasn't just care, it was fear. He went on. "When I woke up and realized I had been reborn to the day of the college entrance exam, I deliberately bombed the test. I knew you had feelings for Jacob. And in that life, even though you ended up with me, you weren't truly happy. So I wanted to fulfill your wish," he said, his voice calm. "I worked my way to the top of the entertainment industry, also Emily would fall for me, and give Jacob back to you. But I didn't expect it would lead to your death even earlier. And so, I followed you." For a moment I didn't know what to say. According to Silver, in the first life, Jacob and Emily had ended up together, and I had chosen Silver as a second-best option. But I still couldn't let go of Jacob. My marriage to Silver had been strained. In the second life, Silver had tried to help me. He had taken Emily for himself, hoping that would free Jacob up for me. But instead, Jacob blamed me for everything, and in the end, he killed me. Now in this third life, Silver had gotten involved with Emily earlier than before, deliberately ruining Jacob's mental state and throwing both their lives into chaos. All of it, just to take revenge for me. "When you asked me to take off my glasses," he said, "that was when I realized you'd been reborn too. I was so happy," he continued, his voice softening. "Happy that you could finally see Jacob's true nature. But I was scared too, scared that you and I would never have anything to do with each other again. After all, in our first life, I was the person you settled for." His voice grew quieter and quieter. Without realizing it, my eyes welled up. Bookmark. So someone had lived through 3 lifetimes, just to love me quietly. He had even gone so far as to take down my romantic rival, for me. Silver kept looking at me, like he was waiting for my reaction. I curled my lips into a faint smile. "Silver," I said, voice trembling slightly, "suddenly I really want to get married." I paused, then looked into his eyes. "With you."